Rorschach, issue 6. Tom King writing, Jorge Fornes on the art. Obviously, we've been big fans of this book as it's been coming out. And this issue is more on how, you know, the kid and the old man, how their relationship formed. Someone unknown to us delivers a package to the hotel where our main character is staying, and it's basically all the letters that these two characters wrote to each other. You know, Will and I've forgotten her actual name.
Oh shoot,
Laura.
Laura.
Yeah, it only says "Dear Laura" like 8 times in this issue.
Yeah.
But so the structure of this issue is really quite straightforward, because it'll be a letter from her to him, then a letter from him to her, and then there's like 3 or 4 like interludes where it cuts to our main character in the hotel, getting the letters and then starting to investigate. Okay, who actually dropped these off? Who had these? Like, how did they get a hold of them? Which leads to the big cliffhanger at the end of the book. And while he's doing that, on TV or the radio in the background in all of his scenes, the presidential debate between and Turley is going on. So it's, you know, it's seeped in all the stuff that it's been building up, but the core of the issue is these letters going back and forth between the characters. And at first they're fairly straightforward. At first she's like, you know, I'm a fan of your work, it's connected to me. He's like, oh, it's always happy to hear. He's especially pleased that she's writing about not the main big not he smells like Teen Spirit. She, you know, she's writing about the hit B-side that no one else talks about.
Well, yeah, which is very similar to Rorschach when we see the character show up.
Because it's the citizen and the unthinker, and the idea is that the citizen is the one who takes an interest in everything that's going on, and that's kind of like what her father was like. And then the unthinker, which kind of represents Will's father, the old man's father, because he was someone who would rather shut the window and ignore the screams in the alleyway, which is literally the example we get later on.
Right, and so there are these opposing forces that end up having similarities because of their upbringing, they end up doing the opposite. Now, not quite her, because she's more proactive. She does the opposite of what her dad wanted, right? But he goes and he wants to be more involved, and it's almost like, you know, he created the pirate character as a version of himself that got to be more proactive, in that, you know, he was from this, he says in one of the letters, he came from a place of evil, but he was always good, and that's what he related to.
Yeah, but then he goes to resent it because it becomes this symbol of like him not actually doing anything. You know, especially when he starts seeing it on, like, you know, backpacks and lunchbox. It's just a commercial thing at a certain point. Which the
constant reminder of his
what he says, you know, sees as his own failures now, and that's why he like gravitates towards the citizen and the unthinker as characters that are more representative of something that he wants to be. And it kind of, over the course of these letters, sets up how they connect. And we've spoken, not the last issue, but the issue before, about her looking for kind of the next Rorschach in a lot of ways. But at the same time, like, I kind of take some of these letters at face value. She seems kind of genuine in her sort of descriptions of who she is, and it doesn't feel like she's just trying to manipulate him in any way.
No, not at all. They don't seem it, because it feels like when she initially reached out, she struck a nerve, and then that's what he wrote back, and they would get more in depth as they went on with their own histories, and how they can relate to each other. And they're almost like, again, they're like a yin and a yang, right? They're two halves that equal a whole, and they complement each other really well. Which leads to whatever happened with them and the Turley
I do think
assassination attempt.
I do think there's an irony here that the unthinker is the one that looks kind of like Rorschach but without the Rorschach mask, is the unthinker. I think that's kind of an interesting like irony, right?
Is that, because I thought that was the citizen.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that is the citizen.
I'm not too sure, but it does look like the question.
Joe, what I appreciate about it is that I appreciate that as he's talking about why he likes these characters and, you know, why he gravitates towards them over the Pontius Pirate, is that we've never really heard much about these characters. They've probably been mentioned briefly in this book before, but not to any great extent.
Yeah.
And I kind of loved it just from the context of how he talks about them. Like, I kind of get the point of them and kind of almost the satire they had in his creations. It's kind of like really well done in how it gets across that information.
Yeah. Well, and on the middle level, where they talk about, like, the citizen who it represents that person that wants to do more, right? It's the opposite of how his dad was, right? He was the one that would go in there and make a change versus and what did they say about the unthinker? To where, because she says she related to that. You know, it's on the first page.
Yeah, because for her it was a lot about that she was kind of just fulfilling her dad's like desires for her rather than getting to be what she wanted herself.
Right. I'm trying to find that
she almost desired wanting to like kind of like shut off and not like be a part of it. You know?
That's what it was.
Because one of the big letters, of course, is when she describes a dream that she had, like a waking dream where she dreams that she's in a church, but she's never been in. She's only seen them on TV.
Right.
But she's there with the citizen, and you're right, the citizen is the one that looks kind of like Rorschach.
Okay, that's what I thought.
She sees a Rorschach mask on the bench, and something about it made her happy, truly happy. And maybe this is a kind of a manipulation moment here. That's like almost planting the seed of like the citizen becoming Rorschach, and Rorschach being what the citizen is ultimately meant to be. Because I mean, ultimately, these letters for him, especially when he gets to his like backstory, talking about how he would, you know, read stories. He'd read Frankenstein, which she goes out and reads, and she talks about how she's 19, which is the same age as Mary Shelley when she wrote Frankenstein.
Right.
But when he specifically gets to the whole thing where, you know, they'd hear screams like some woman was brutally murdered in their apartment building or just outside their apartment building, and they actually heard the screams, but his father went up and shut the window and said, "No, that's the city's problem. Society's
that's none of our business."
You know what? Actually, there's a moment here. There's a line that doesn't quite say we live in a society, but it kind of like talks around the idea of it, where that's kind of what his father's idea was. Is no, this is society's thing. Society forms this. Society does this. So then when he later uses that and talks about how, you know, we are formed by society, it does almost feel like it's a good version of what like people use for the Joker movie in a weird way, like how we're developing his character into turning into what he becomes, which is this, you know, attempted assassin on the presidential candidate.
Right.
You know, it's interesting.
Well, and the idea that society creates things, right? So like they're talking about the waking dream, and that it came to Mary Shelley, that the whole idea, you know, the short story that became Frankenstein, which is also called The Modern Prometheus, and you know, basically that in trying to defeat death, right, he only created more death and destruction. It created this kind of cycle. And you know, what here is that creation for both of them, you know, for the kid and for Meyerson, the writer, like which of their creations is going to create more problem, you know, going forward here? Is it that they try to assassinate Turley? Is it just her idea that the spirit of Rorschach lives in these random people, right? Or like the whole idea of the squids, you know, can come back and attack and whatnot. It was just that beeline once you get, or that through line once you get to that.
I think another thing to mention about the Frankenstein, you know, referencing that's been made here is that Frankenstein itself is about someone who creates something that turns into be a monster, although notably a sympathetic monster who isn't necessarily to blame for what they are. So I think that thematically ties into everything going on here, where, you know, if they are created, you know, if she's created by her father, if he's created by his father, they're not entirely to blame for what they've become necessarily. It's especially when you can.
However, they have agency.
Oh, they do.
So,
yes.
Like, did you ever read the original Frankenstein?
I have done, actually. Yeah.
In school. Yeah. So you find out that in that version, it's not just this, you know, the Boris Karloff monster, right? It actually can talk and has a name and, like, you know, has agency of itself that you can't just blame the creator on. You know, he still makes those choices. And so that's here the parallels that are being drawn between all of them. Like, yeah, they were created, but they still chose to do this, you know. And I think that's there.
And here, I mean, a big thing about the Frankenstein creation is that not only, I mean, it makes choices, but it was also never taught right from wrong. You know, even its own creator kind of shied away from it. You know, his responsibilities as a father, essentially. And this story here has both of these characters. both like learning the wrong mistakes and also trying to rebel against what their father wanted them to be. Like that's a driving force for both of them.
There's that layer too.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on with that comparison. Just the story of Frankenstein itself, but on top of the reference to her writing Frankenstein, which is the idea that she had this idea,
right? As a dream.
Yeah, and now obviously Laura's having this idea now too. And it's not explicit. She doesn't specifically say, "Hey, you should become Rorschach," but she plants the seed of like because he is kind of effectively the citizen was kind of like what he wishes he was. And then the idea of you mix Rorschach onto that, she's planting that seed. Either intentionally or unintentionally, I'm not sure at this point, but it's planted.
Right. Well, and just remember what he did with his neighbor, right? That whole story.
Well, I think, I mean, I'd love to actually go back and read that issue again and try and line up the timeline here. If like how far was he into these letters when he did that? You know, I think that's a very interesting thought process.
And yeah, no, just King again is killing it here with this type of stuff. And then on top of all that, you have all these layers on top of layers of the story, and then you look at the art, right? And like we always go over how great Forness is, but here there's two panels and they're kind of opposite. The one that gets me is the full page of her like at the edge of that pool, right in the sun, and it's all yellow, and she's sitting there. And then contrasting that is where he starts talking about his visions when he was reading as a kid and getting lost in books, and Frankenstein's monster's there, like in front of him. It's a small panel where that happens, where he can visualize what these ideas are, and it's like, is she doing the same thing there? We just don't see what exactly she's visualizing.
I mean, hell, technically that page right before he visualizes Frankenstein is the page where she has the daydream. So I think maybe it is showing that they both are visualizing things in a certain way. In fact, something you said there reminded me earlier on. I think it's the second letter when it's the 2 full page spreads where she's sitting at the edge of an empty pool. For her, that's the for one. Her letter, and then his is when he's back to us, and it's like a full page spread of him walking down the street. I do think it's really simple, but the idea that she's young, so her life's ahead of us, so she's facing us. But in his page, because he's old and he's nearing the end of his days, that his life's behind him, so his back's to us. Like again, it's simple little things like that. That just some thoughts went into it. It's really neat. There's a page later on where during one of the letters she tells them, she doesn't actually say what she did specifically, but she killed someone who this man was beating up his wife or something like that in a motel or whatever, and it's all in silhouette. You just see it, the only thing you see is her eyes and the complete silhouette and the blood of the headshot when the gun actually goes off. But it's wonderful stuff. But then it turns into the pirate comic, right? That the very next page is more silhouette, but the silhouette for him is the pirate comic. He's never actually acted on the things he's wanted to do. He's only drawn about it in the comic. So I think that's a really interesting. If you go with the idea that he is inspired by her youth and her willingness to actually act on what she's doing, and that's what's given him like energy and it's inspiring him. I think comparing her actual act of in her eyes heroic violence to what he drew as heroic violence, and with a similar art style, is a really nuanced touch between them to like them.
Well, there's that, and I just now realized that the panel layouts are the exact same.
Oh, they are, yeah. Well, actually,
they're not mirrored, but it's 3 across the top, and they're all the same proportion. 4 in the middle, 2, and it's like that every time the letters that they mimic each other.
No, they are mirrored. I'm looking at them. It's like they're flipped, because you'll notice that on the so the page with her silhouettes, like at the bottom, the thick panels on the right, but then you go to his page, it's switched and it's on the left. So it is actually like a mirrored image. So I read this digitally. I assume the physical book they were side by side.
I'd have to look, because I read that this morning, and I got really lost up in the story that I just now realized that they were doing this. Yeah. So I'm gonna have to go back and grab the physical.
And again, the blood is red, unlike the silhouette of everything else. So I get I love that touch that this is actually something she's really done, but for him this was just something he drew about. So that inspiration, and then she says she tried to kill herself, but she didn't. She thought of writing to him instead. And he talks about how when he was miserable and he couldn't draw what he wanted when he was like working in a drawing shop, and he's I'm leaving all the detective stuff to the end. I'm just focusing on
those two. No, I'm just. But no, I can't believe I didn't realize that this does the mirroring until right now. Like, it's, again, Fornes and King, like, just working together so well.
And it's that thing. So you have the page of her driving off in the full page with her letter, and then the page of him staring at his wall from behind. But what I love
of all of his creations,
with all his creations, but it's mostly Pontius Pirate, right? I mean, there is a citizen, a couple of things in there, but it's a lot of Pontius Pirate. I love the idea that he's staring at that as he's writing to her, "Come and see me. I would like to find the monster." I mean, that line right there, "I would like to find the monster." The idea that, you know, Dr. Frankenstein found his monster, Mary Shelley found her monster. He would like to find the monster with her together, and actually do something about it. So there's this sense of longing, this sense of needing to feel like you're accomplishing something, and maybe that's part of the things that makes someone feel extreme, because they need to feel like they've got a purpose, and feel like that they've got a purpose in a grander scale like that, in a political sense or whatever, makes them feel like they are doing something important. It makes them feel better about their lives. So there's layers. There's layers here. There's so much going on.
Layers on top of layers.
It's so good.
Like, again, this is a perfect, like, I don't say perfect, but like, it is a great sequel to Watchmen, while not trying to be, right? Like, yeah, man. So I looked up the Unthinker and the Citizen, and this was early on. This is in issue 2, where kind of the Unthinker could become anybody. And the Citizen, it was the Citizen's main, you know, they were rivals or arch nemesis or whatever it was. But because I was trying to remember what the Unthinker looked like, and I feel like we knew that the Citizen was the question kind of before, but it didn't land until here when we saw him. More
to go with the mirroring thing, when they actually get to meet each other, obviously it's intercutting with the other story, which we'll get to in a minute, but when she's like at the door waiting for an answer, and then he opens the door, they're on opposite sides of the page, so it mirrors even on the same page, and then until they actually see each other, and then of course they're one panel at the end when they hug. So beautifully laying out, and obviously that intercuts with the detective going to the apparent home of whoever's left him these letters, but there is obviously investigation throughout the book. He bribes the guy at the security desk to let him see the security cameras to see who left these letters. He goes and finds out, where the valet parking was, what the guy's license plate is. He calls someone in, like, no, I need to know tonight, like, whose license plate is this? And it's all just him trying to get to whoever left these letters. And the cliffhanger at the end of the issue, as he's getting into this apartment, is whoever this is dressed as Rorschach, and they're sitting watching this presidential debate, which, again, we've been hearing this debate play. Every time we cut back to the detective, we've been hearing this debate play out throughout. Talking about a conservative revolution, that, Redford served 4 terms, 16 years, his time is up, all that stuff. I feel like there's probably so much political subtext to read into with all that dialogue that I can't even begin to scratch the surface of.
No, but it feels like typical American politics, where they're calling each other out in the debate for these things, and then they're smoothing over, oh no, what he's really meaning is this, and it feels very, like King almost could have pulled it straight from the debates this time and just, swapped out certain terms for things that fit here. So, but yeah, now I'm gonna have to go back and read I'm gonna have to find some more time, and go back and read through these, and, like you said, line them up with stuff, because all the Unthinker and Citizen stuff happened in chapter 2, which is also the one about the apartment and the neighbors.
I think this is going to reread wonderfully, because there's going to be so many things that we spot on rereads with more context. And which, by the way, that's the other thing we have to mention. He's got a cassette tape, which the name Frank Miller is mentioned like several times. I don't think, and
Otto Binder or Binder.
Yeah, don't think that didn't stick out to me.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
There's Frank Miller getting name dropped in there. Neat. No, this book, well, it's one of those things where every time I read an issue as well, like I don't realize how much it's doing until I get to the end, or until I stop down and actually start talking about what it's achieving with its storytelling. And I think this issue is up there again.
Definitely. Well, I came into this one going like, I don't know if it was that, you know, like it was their correspondence back and forth. But then as you start breaking it down,
yeah, because I think
you start to realize all the layers.
Because yeah, first I think for the first half of the issue, the letters back and forth, I didn't find that exciting. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say.
No,
but they weren't really saying much that felt surprising or revealing anything about them. But the more it went and the more it built its story, it started to build a picture. And when it did start getting to them like opening up, I was like, oh no, I appreciate that it took the time to get to this point. I'm happy that it didn't just skip to this, because it gave us this natural progression and understanding of how the relationship developed. So no, I love it. And like just getting the context of like, you know, him opening the envelope with all the letters as we've just started reading them, and we have this context for where, you know, what they are, how he got them.
That Tom King guy can really write.
He really can.
Right? Like we give him grief over other things, but like when it's not like a continuity kind of defining type thing, I think he's at the peak of his.
Just give him minis till the end of time. I mean, he's done a Supergirl mini in a couple of months.
It's the background on my phone for the last week and a half, like since we got that image. So like, you know,
this is wonderful. I like picking what I like more out of Rorschach, Mr. Miracle, and Strange Adventures when they're all done is going to be really tough, because they're all excelling in wonderful ways that are very different. But I feel like, I mean, I don't collect physical books ever, but I feel like, you know, some people out there, obviously some people just won't like his work, and that's fair, but like some people out there are going to have just that collection of deluxe 12-issue hardcovers of all of his books, and he just keeps adding to them. Like, you know, after Mr. Miracle, it was like, okay, that felt like a once in a lifetime like quality book. That was like his spectacle, and then Strange Adventures and then Rorschach overlapping it. Like, it's like these two both feel up to that par. They both feel up to that quality.
I'm gonna do two at one time, and then I'm gonna give Supergirl a sword. Like, all right.
I mean,
do whatever you want.
Strange Adventures might be done by Supergirl starting, or maybe slightly overlap, because that's much later in this run. That may be done soon, but
yeah. What are we on? We were on issue 8
or 9, something in that range.
Yeah, because it was So
that'll just be finishing probably Supergirl starting, but. It makes me excited, you know, and clearly I think his books sell well enough, because I feel like they always do pretty solid. So, DC keep giving them like, you know, 8, 10, 12 issue minis and let them just go nuts. And for the most part, keep it out of continuity. It's fine. Although I think Supergirl technically is in continuity, but you know, whatever. So it's out in space.
Well, that's fine. Yeah.
As long as she doesn't end up killing everyone by the end of the miniseries, I think we're fine.
We like when Kara goes into space.
Yes.
So it's fine. But yeah, so what are we rating this one?
That's a good question. I mean, we didn't mention the art too much on the silhouettes, but obviously the art is, you know.
Yeah, it's Fornes. Like it's always good.
I mean, there's that page like with the inspectors driving to the house towards the end, and it does that thing where it's like the camera, you know, again, quotation, you know, air quotes, but it's like the camera is on the outside of the windshield, so you get the reflection of the lights, the night lights on the window. Oh, it's, you know, just the atmosphere and using things like silhouettes to tie two scenes together is so good. Layouts, like obviously the mirroring thing, everything about it, just So what are you in a
I'm gonna give this a 9. It's I came in, it was maybe at like an 8, but the more that we, you know, dissect it, I kept getting bumped up. So I'm
gonna go with a 9 out of 10 as well. I was even tempted to go at 9.5, but I'll stick with the 9. I'll keep things in check just now. So there you go. That is Rorschach issue 6. We're only halfway through. There's another 6 issues of this.
So you remember there was that issue of Watchmen that where it was like a mirror, where it was symmetrical. I think in fact it was called Fearful Symmetry. Do we remember what issue that was?
Oh, I don't. I remember it being one of the issues. I don't remember what issue it is though.
Okay, let me see. Because if it's 6, I'm gonna lose my mind.
I mean, it could have been.
But it was called Fearful Symmetry, right?
That sounds right. I mean, it makes sense given the title.
Okay. Yeah. It doesn't say what issue.
If you just look at like the preview pages on Comixology for that issue, for issue 6, I mean, it should be obvious, right?
Yeah, no, I googled Fearful Symmetry and was like, this says chapter 5. So
Issue 5.
Off by 1.
Well, hey, if it wasn't right for this story to have it issue 5, then I'm right. It doesn't need to shoehorn it in for the reference. No, I think I'm happy with that.
But if this is halfway through, right? Yeah. So this is where the mirror happens. Mm-hmm. We'll see how that goes. So
yeah, I am.
Shoot. All right.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. So.